From Superman to Geralt of Rivia, Henry Cavill has played a diverse bunch of fan-favorite characters, but the guy's workload is looking pretty light, for now. There's a good chance that he might fulfill our dreams and his own destiny by joining the James Bond franchise. See, Cavill has been a frontrunner in the Bond race for a long time, and the interesting thing about Bond speculation is that the best place to look is at the bookies. Based on insider info, these bookies can give you odds on which actor could don the tux of 007. You don't have to do any betting if you want to, and I wouldn't recommend it myself, but let's look at the current odds, shall we? Henry Cavill actually has some of the best chances of becoming our next James Bond.
There's someone out there who's like, that's not true! I was there too! It was just down to me and Daniel, and I was the younger option.
While he used to be #1 on the bookies charts, his odds have currently slipped into second place. Right now, they have his odds of getting the role at 4-1, which is nothing to sneeze at. The only actor with better chances than him right now is Regé-Jean Page. Bridgerton's heartthrob currently has 2-1 odds of winning the part. If you'd like to take bigger chances, Idris Elba and Tom Hardy still have odds, but they're not very high. Those two used to be frontrunners themselves, but something these bookies know has caused their odds to decline. At the moment, it does look like the final showdown will be between Cavill and Page. No disrespect to Bridgerton's most mysterious duke, but I think Cavill will come out on top. After all, he nearly pulled it off once before. 2 decades ago, Metro-Goldwyn-Mayer was in the same spot they're in now. There was a vacancy in the role of James Bond, and they were figuring out who should be the next face of the franchise. After picking through a bunch of actors, Daniel Craig got to rock Bond's Walter PPK, as y'all know. What you might not have known is who wound up being the runner-up for the character. It was our Man of Steel himself, Henry Cavill. That's right, Cavill got so very close to being the James Bond of the last era.
It was then that I got the Bond screen test. And that was the thing which put me in Variety, and then my name was in Variety, and then more people started pursuing me, and it became a bit more, I was not a name as such, but I had at least been printed.
Now, I'm sure there were many reasons why Craig beat him out at the time. He proved to be really successful as James Bond.
I will do. As soon as I've won this game.
We're not seriously going back there.
I wouldn't dream of it.
And who knows if Cavill could have sparked the same magic at that point in his career. It didn't help that Cavill was really young and lacked the prestige he has today. Speaking of today, we know now that Henry is the internet's favorite actor, and an absolute charmer to boot. If you're thinking that Henry might have some hard feelings about that decision, you don't have to worry. He's been really gracious about the fact that Craig was a great Bond, and he appreciated the chance to partake in the process. He also implied in many interviews that he's still open to filling in Craig's shoes if MGM would have him, and here are the reasons I think they should. First off, he's clearly got the looks. Daniel Craig was famously history's first blonde Bond. He had the right appearance for the relatively unique direction they took with that version of the character. Craig's Bond was a rougher and gruffer man with a heart of gold. But for the next era, MGM might opt to take 007 back to basics. It makes sense for them to go for a version of the character that fits the vibe of the old Bonds, but without all that poorly aged stuff. If you put all the Bonds together in a lineup and set Henry beside them, you have to admit that he'd fit right in. He's got the classy look to him, with a square jaw that seemingly every Bond had before Dan came along. Of course, playing a movie super spy is about more than just looks. The reason why Cavill lost out against Craig before was because of a lack of experience. Clearly, that's not going to be a problem anymore. At this point, Cavill has headlined a bunch of high-profile franchises. As Superman, he was the face of an entire superhero cinematic universe. As Geralt, he was the star of one of Netflix's biggest shows.
She knew you'd come.
Where's Renfrey?
She's at the tower with your little friend, Marilka.
She gave us a message to pass on to you.
But when it comes to proving Cavill's James Bond cred, you have to look at the man from U.N.C.L.E. In those movies, he played the lead character, a charming and confident socialite who appreciates the finer things in life. Oh, and he's also a super spy. I'm willing to bet that the man from U.N.C.L.E. was Cavill's audition for James Bond. Having the movie coincide with Skyfall, Craig's most popular Bond film, was maybe not the best idea, but still, it stands as a feature-length audition tape. And that wasn't the only spy movie he did. As August Walker, Cavill faced off against one of the longest tenured secret agents in cinema, Tom Cruise, in Mission Impossible Fallout. If that wasn't enough, he has 2 spy movies in production right now. Argylle is this insane movie about a spy who has amnesia and is tricked into thinking he's a spy novelist. Meanwhile, the Ministry of Ungentlemanly Warfare centers on the Special Operations Executive. They were a special ops group founded during World War II by Winston Churchill. And, get this, Ian Fleming. Oh yeah, Henry wants James Bond all right. Now, I think one thing might stand in Cavill's way. Unfortunately, age is more than just a number. One of the things that might give Regé-Jean Page an edge over Henry Cavill is that he's a lot younger. MGM are supposedly looking for an actor in their 30s to play the next Bond, and at 39 years old, he's pushing that limit. I'd love to tell you that MGM could just ignore this, but they probably learned a hard lesson from the Craig years. See, Dan was about the same age Cavill is now when Casino Royale came out, and his tenure as 007 had a lot of delays. Starting with Skyfall, the movies took longer and longer to come out, and Craig would age between them. The result of that was he became less capable of doing the sorts of stunts that you see in a James Bond film. Many of the delays in releasing those movies happened because Craig got injured on set, and that was one of the reasons why he'd swear up and down that each movie that came out would be his last. Now, Henry Cavill is at the age as Daniel Craig when he started, but he just hasn't been cast yet. By the time his first movie came out, he'd be in his 40s. We could potentially be heading for the same situation we had with Craig. All that being said, I do think there are differences in these situations. Well, it's more like one big difference: training. While Daniel Craig has done action movies, they weren't quite as demanding as James Bond wound up being. It does seem like in this day and age, movies ask a lot more of actors than they used to. But Henry Cavill has been immersed in this world of high-intensity filmmaking for basically his whole career. All of his roles, but especially Superman and Geralt, required physical conditioning and training. After all, those abs didn't come from nowhere. I think even as Cavill gets older, he'll be better suited to the rigors of the 007 life. That is why I say that he's still Hollywood's best bet, in my humble opinion. And hey, Regé-Jean Page can be a runner-up to him and take over the mantle when Henry finally retires. That's all I have for you today about Henry Cavill's potential future as James Bond.